10 things that you can do right now, literally right now, to drop the spend on your AWS bill. What I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this up into two pieces. I'm going to divide this into an architectural conversation and a programmatic conversation in terms of there's architectural things you can do and there are programmatic things you can do. So the first thing I want you to take a look at is EC2 instances, low utilization, and right sizing. So EC2, for those that may not know, stands for Elastic Compute Cloud. It allows you to host virtualized compute instances. And from time to time, those may not be utilized quite as much as you think. And the other thing is, I want you to make sure you're right sizing. Now, what I would tell you is if you're coming from an on premises environment, what I want you to realize is in an on premises environment, there's usually huge capital expenditures that are upfront. So you're investing in lots of infrastructure and you're having to amortize that out over 3 to 5 years. And what happens is you have to size that out very large. So in AWS, it's on demand usage. So it's pay by the drink. So you can spin things up elastically and spin them down. The other thing you want to look at is specifically in the AWS context is AWS CloudWatch and specifically your metrics there around CPU utilization. If you want to get memory utilization, you have to do a custom CloudWatch metric. And in general, you want to take those metrics and feed that back into to determine if you're right sized. The other thing is if you're not using the compute, shut it off. So if you have lower dev environments and that type of thing, if you have lower dev environments, shut them off after 5. If you only need them between 8 and 5 p.m., shut those off and then you can spin those down and save money on the compute. Okay, number 2, EBS stands for Elastic Block Storage. EBS is a service that allows you to attach a block store to your EC2 servers, and those can also be underutilized as well. You're going to want to use a service called AWS Trusted Advisor to kind of look at both your low utilization on your EC2 instances, as well as your low utilization on your EBS volumes. That's a native way to do it. There are a number of partner offerings out there. I won't name any vendors, but just do a little research that take some of your metadata to your utilization and pipe it in to look at and give you visualizations on and give you actionable insights on what you can do. So if you have low utilization, you have two options once you flag those types of resources. You can either delete those volumes if you truly don't need them, or if you're concerned that you may need them in the future, you can simply take a snapshot of them, which is essentially a backup. We call it in AWS, they call it snapshots before you delete them. And the cost to snapshot something, the equivalent of that amount of storage persisted as a snapshot is a fraction of what it is in a live EBS volume. Number 3, analyze Amazon S3. So S3, for those that may be watching this that don't realize what that is, S3 stands for Simple Storage Service, and it's an object store. So it's an object store that sits out in the S3 service. It's a highly durable store. It's replicated in 3 different areas. It's cost optimized compared to EBS volumes, and you can definitely leverage that there. S3 is also the place to build your data lake around. In a future live, I'll probably talk about data lakes. Super passionate about those. I'm helping my customers build a lot of data lakes. And I'll tell you this, data lakes is more than a buzzword. This is some really powerful stuff. If you don't have a data lake strategy set for your business, it's something you're going to take a look at, but that's a topic for another live. Now within S3, there are what we call storage tiers. You start off with the standard tier. So the standard tier offers you a certain amount of durability and it assumes a certain amount of access in terms of how you're going to access it. So S3 standard is for warm and or hot storage that you're going to be accessing very frequently. And that comes with it a certain cost. S3 and relative to EBS is more cost optimized when you compare gigabyte to gigabyte. But within the S3 realm, once you've determined that you truly can persist your data as an object store, there are different tiers you can go with. For example, you can go with infrequent access. which gives you the same durability and love with S3 standard. However, it assumes you're not going to access it that much. So when you do access it, there's another pricing dimension for the access on that. But there's some tools within AWS that you can look at to determine your access patterns. For example, one of them is called S3 Intelligent Tiering. But the moral of the story here is to simply have some due diligence around your storage tiers in S3. Now, identify RDS and Redshift instances that potentially have a low utilization. So for those that may not be living and breathing in an AWS world, like myself, there's a lot of alphabet soup here. RDS stands for Relational Database Service. So it's essentially a database service that allows you to run a managed database service so that your cloud provider is handling the heavy lifting of maintaining the infrastructure, the database engine updates, and all those things. And all you have to do is innovate on behalf of your customers and deliver on your roadmap. So, and Redshift is a massively parallel processing data warehouse purpose built for the cloud that runs at petabyte scale and up to exabyte scale if you're using Redshift Spectrum. So I realize I'm throwing a lot of services at you, not trying to do that. We'll talk about this stuff in many other lives as time goes on. And if you're not getting this stuff now, light bulbs will eventually go off, because one of the things I'm very passionate about is what I tell people: I have the mind of a builder and the heart of a teacher. So you compare those together. And what I like to do is to take traditionally complicated topics and be able to explain those to my mom, for example. And my mom admittedly, she openly says this to me and tell anybody, that I gave my son all my brains when it comes to technology. And she says that and she laughs, and I love it. 'Cause bless her heart, she's not technical. And by the way, I've been my mom's IT technical guy since probably, I would say, maybe around 7, 8 years old. The very first thing I started to do was when the power used to dip at our house, I used to go and reset all the clocks on the microwave and the VCR. Actually, no one in the house could do it but me. Even my dad couldn't do it, or my sister. I've been solving technical challenges for years. But yeah, back on the topic here of RDS and Redshift, believe it or not, you can actually stop your RDS instance for a finite amount of time. And when you stop your RDS instance, the underlying compute cost associated with that RDS instance also stop. So that's good. You're only having to pay to persist your underlying storage where your database is persisted. Same thing with Redshift. You can pause that Redshift cluster and save costs there too. DynamoDB, more service things at you. So what DynamoDB is, in its simplest form, is a NoSQL key value store that's massively horizontally scalable. It's used by a number of customers that I work with for a number of reasons. It is a very powerful service in terms of the number of transactions per second it can process. And the more read capacity and write throughput that you provision, it scales out proportionately horizontal to give you those single digit millisecond latency type high performance type response times. So it's a really great service that I suggest you take a look at, depending on your use case. But this live is focused on really how to cost optimize that. So if you are using DynamoDB or considering using it in the future, I'd recommend you to look at auto scaling function or on demand, or you can even throw something called DAX, DAX, Dynamo Accelerator, in front of it that caches some of your responses so that you don't necessarily need to provision as much read capacity. So there's this kind of architectural dial you can turn, probably a little bit more outside the scope of this conversation. But again, the theme of these first ones we're talking about is kind of architectural things you can do, which is the trade-off is there's a level of effort from your engineering teams, which you have to pull away some of your engineering employees from delivering for your customers. You know, if you have a huge enterprise company and you get a lot of engineers around, you might be able to modify somebody's role to have them focus on cost optimization. But I've been doing this for a while, almost 5 years, specifically cloud only, living in the cloud world for 5 years, specifically working with customers. And I've seen it both in enterprise with teams of lots of engineers, as well as startups, being able to dedicate a very talented and sharp engineer and have them focus on cost. There's some friction there in making that decision. So something you got to think about.